Star Wars is without a doubt one of the best stories ever written, and it changed the way we make and look at movies today. The original trilogy is considered to many the best films ever made, and is by far one of the most successful movie franchises of all time.
You've taken your first step into a larger world.
People love and adore these movies and still celebrate them even 40 years after the first film was made. Every time it looks like Star Wars is over, more and more is made to keep this incredible saga and expanded franchise alive, and introduce it to new generations who can appreciate it just as much as their parents did, and their parents before that. It's truly a masterpiece that has so much dimension, and it doesn't look like it's slowing down anytime soon. As much as people celebrate these films, however, there always seems to be the common perception that the prequel trilogy that includes episodes 1 to 3, The Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith, are terrible movies. People have picked the movies apart, looking for things to criticize and nitpick. But I don't think that most people took the time to analyze these films and actually look for some things that make this trilogy not as bad as everyone says, and maybe even prove that they're actually good films. That's what I'm going to discuss in this video. I'm going to discuss why these films work and what they add to the entire Star Wars saga. George Lucas's references from ancient mythology, philosophy, religion, modern history, and politics, and even his own work expanding on his original trilogy, and he puts it all together to tell the expanded story of his epic space opera. It's every great masterpiece combined. It is a story that tells all stories. The prequel trilogy delves deeper into the main villain of the original trilogy, Darth Vader, aka Anakin Skywalker, and shows his humble beginnings and slowly his transition to the dark side, to become the man in the suit that we all know and love. One of the things that makes the original trilogy so great is the fact that it borrows so much from other classic films, serials, and stories. But the prequel trilogy goes beyond that, and borrows more heavily on ancient archetypes, religion, and myths. Let's talk about Anakin. We all know that he grows up to be evil, but the way Lucas tells the story is incredible writing, especially if you compare it to many other villains in other movies and books. He doesn't just become evil right away. We slowly start to see his transition to the dark side over many years. When we meet him, he's 9 years old and is a slave on the planet Tatooine.
You're a slave? I'm a person and my name is Anakin.
So right away we already see he doesn't have a very good life. Luke's was far better in comparison, which might be one of the reasons why Anakin was turned to the dark side more easily than Luke was. Right away there are very obvious biblical references that Lucas takes on in our young hero. We find out that he was conceived by the Force, making Shmi Skywalker, his mother, parallel the Virgin Mary.
There was no father. I carried him, I gave birth, I raised him. I can't explain what happened.
It makes Anakin parallel Jesus Christ himself. Anakin is the chosen one, and is part of a prophecy that foretold of a savior who would bring balance to the Force and destroy the Sith, the sworn enemy of the Jedi.
You refer to the prophecy of the one who will bring balance to the Force. You believe it's this boy?
The Chosen One is another idea taken from ancient religion, most notably in the book of Enoch, that references the one chosen by God, who was actually the more well-known grandfather of Noah from Noah's Ark. Anakin's inward struggle also parallels that of Achilles from ancient Greek mythology. As Anakin gets older, we see his struggles to hide his feelings, and he's oftentimes very angry, something that parallels Achilles, who was always angry in the beginning of his journey. In the first 20 books, it focuses on his anger toward Agamemnon. Then in books 22 to 24, he's angry at Hector. Just like Achilles, Anakin is constantly getting angry at people, whether that be his master Obi-Wan, the Jedi Council, or even himself.
I'm a Jedi. I know I'm better than this.
In the first line of the Iliad, it says, "The wrath of Peleus' son Achilles, whose anger brought pains 1,000-fold upon the Achaeans." This is another thing that Lucas incorporated in Anakin's fall to the dark side. Once when his grief and anger over losing his mother drives him to slaughter an entire village of sand people. And another time when his anger and passion drive him to kill all of the Jedi in the Jedi Temple, both times killing both women and children.
And not just the men, but the women and the children too.
His wrath being just as destructive as Achilles. And I think that Yoda's famous line of
"Anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering,"
is easily reflected in Anakin's struggle. His anger and hate lead to the suffering of the people that wrong him or get in his way to power.
They're like animals, and I slaughtered them like animals.
And I think it's also worth mentioning how similar the names Anakin and Achilles are. Another person in ancient religion that Anakin parallels is actually the devil himself. In the classic poem Paradise Lost, we learn the story and origin of Lucifer, who is the most beautiful of all angels and God's favorite. Being God's favorite makes him the one chosen by God, just as Anakin is the chosen one. Both have high hopes from the people they serve, whether that is the Jedi or God himself. Both Anakin and Lucifer crave more power.
I want more. And I know I shouldn't.
And eventually, Lucifer tries to overthrow God, while Anakin overthrows the Jedi. Lucifer set out to make his own kingdom to compete against God, something that was very much in Anakin's thought process, to overthrow his new master, Palpatine.
I am more powerful than the Chancellor. I can overthrow him. And together, you and I can rule the galaxy.
And this is something that Lucas took from his own original trilogy, as he shows the origins of a line that Vader speaks to his son Luke.
You can destroy the Emperor, and together we can rule the galaxy as father and son.
Both had so much arrogance and pride, and that was ultimately their greatest weakness.
You underestimate my power!
Both had such potential to do great things, but their quest for more power made them lose everything.
You were the chosen one! It was said that you would destroy the Sith, not join them!
Lucifer was exiled to Hell, and Anakin was actually burned alive on a planet very reminiscent of Hell. And the remainder of Anakin's life could be considered him in Hell, as he's more machine than man, and just like Lucifer, he lost everything on his quest for power. Also, both dropped their original name, whether that be Anakin or Lucifer, and take on a new identity. For Anakin, it was Darth Vader, and for Lucifer, it was Satan or the Devil. Lucas continually takes such classic, dynamic stories and makes them translate into his own incredible universe, which is why I think the prequels are so great. Now, as evil as Anakin became, he didn't just become evil overnight. It was a gradual process that was influenced by many events and many people, which is another thing that I think Lucas did right in the prequel trilogy. Some things that might have influenced Anakin's turn to the dark side include the fact that he was born into slavery, he was forced to leave his mother as a young child, was unwanted by the Jedi and they only reluctantly take him on, no one ever trusts him fully, especially the Jedi Council.
I don't trust him.
And the Council continuously leaves Anakin out of the loop.
More and more, I get the feeling that I'm being excluded from the Council.
The Jedi were not the angels they're made out to be. They keep secrets.
This assignment is not to be on record.
They could be considered pretty corrupt, and eventually I think that the Clone Wars affects them and the choices that they make. And ultimately this affects Anakin, because he's so important to the Jedi, the war, and the galaxy. And that's a lot of pressure for one person to have. And with all of that going on, and all of that on your shoulders, it can make anyone snap. While the Jedi keep secrets from Anakin and don't fully trust him, the only person that seems to care about him other than Padme is Palpatine.
He befriended me. He's watched out for me ever since I arrived here.
And he continuously undermines the Jedi.
It's upsetting to me to see that the Council doesn't seem to fully appreciate your talents.
Palpatine pulls each string so beautifully as he manipulates Anakin. Anakin is struggling because he keeps seeing Padme die in his dreams, the same way he saw his mother die, and he's terrified he's going to lose her. Now, I'd like to draw your attention to another text from ancient religion called Genesis, where Eve is confronted by a serpent in the Garden of Eden, and the serpent tells her, "You can have the power of God," the very thing that God keeps denying Eve. This parallels episode 3, with Palpatine as the serpent and Anakin as Eve. Palpatine tells Anakin that he can have the power to save his wife, but it can only be done through the dark side of the Force.
Is it possible to learn this power?
Not from a Jedi.
The serpent then tells Eve God is afraid of this power. This again parallels the Jedi being afraid to use the dark side of the Force, even though time and time again we see that it makes you more powerful. It gave Anakin the power to beat Count Dooku, and gave Luke the power to beat Anakin. The Jedi are afraid of the power of the dark side, just as God is afraid of his full power, which is why he won't give it to Eve. Both the serpent and Palpatine promised the young, naive hero to trust them and to take the power that they are offering them, telling them that they deserve it. So you can see how Anakin was gradually pushed over the edge to turn to the dark side. But the biggest thing that made him turn is his fear of loss.
The fear of loss is a path to the dark side.
As I said, Anakin continues to have dreams about Padme dying, the same way he had dreams about his mother just before she died, and is terrified that Padme will suffer the same fate as his mother. He's desperate to save the one he loves, and that's what makes him go after the power in the first place, so he can learn the ability to save the ones closest to him. But by going after that power to save her is ultimately what sets Padme's death and his nightmares in stone. His dark side actually comes from something good. He wants to save and protect the people he loves. An admirable quest. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. On top of that, he thinks he's doing the right thing when he turns to the dark side. The Senate is corrupt and he decides to go with the Chancellor, the person who is already in power. If he went with a Jedi, he would be going against the government, which when you look at the big picture is actually illegal.
My loyalties lie with the Chancellor.
And you can't blame him for doing this, after all the secrets and corruption he saw in the Jedi Order, and after Palpatine was the only one that actually listened and cared about him, or so it seemed. Palpatine used Anakin's vulnerability driven from the fear of losing the woman he loves as a base to manipulate him and turn him to the dark side, making Anakin a rather abused and tragic character, especially considering the fact that the reason he turned to the dark side to save the woman he loves is all for nothing, and he ends up thinking that he was the one that killed the person he did all of this for.
In your anger, you killed her.
Just the icing on the cake from Palpatine. How much more broken could you be? Both physically when he becomes more machine than man, and mentally when he lost everything he cared about, and was sent down a dark path for reasons that were now irrelevant and gone, forever trapped in his dark and broken self. Again, this is brilliant writing by Lucas because everything isn't black and white. Depending on how you look at it, Anakin could be doing the right thing, and this draws on our own history, mainly focusing on our political intrigue and corruption. It's the fall of republics and rise of dictators. Palpatine can easily be compared to some of the most notorious dictators of all time, but I think Lucas took the most influence from Adolf Hitler. Palpatine's gradual rise to power matches up almost exactly the way Hitler's rise was played out. Just like Hitler, Palpatine manipulated his way to become Chancellor. As Chancellor, both of them want more power, and both are granted that power. Hitler got more power when he proposed the Enabling Act in 1933, which gave him complete and absolute control to take action, with no limitations and no laws to stop him. The same thing happens in Star Wars when they grant Chancellor Palpatine emergency powers.
The Senate must vote the Chancellor emergency powers.
Hitler refused to give up his powers after the 4 years of the Act wore out, and the same happens with Chancellor Palpatine.
Our allegiance is to the Senate, not to its leader, who has managed to stay in office long after his term has expired.
There are many more similarities too. The Empire's army in Star Wars was drawn heavily on the stormtroops that were part of Hitler's Nazi force, and they were oftentimes nicknamed brown shirts or stormtroopers. And let's not forget all of the red, white, and black that represented the Empire, the same colors that Hitler chose for his uprising. And this is even more apparent in the new films with the First Order. They even have a similar hand gesture to the one that Hitler and the Nazis used. In Revenge of the Sith, Palpatine's final speech is very reminiscent of Hitler's many speeches, especially in the way it affects the crowd, making them cheer and clap.
So this is how liberty dies. With thunderous applause.
Lucas shows how democracy is fragile, especially when destroyed from within.
The Republic will be reorganized into the first galactic empire.
Another historical influence that plays out in the prequels is the Roman Empire. The transition from the Galactic Republic to the Galactic Empire is very similar to the fall of the Roman Empire and the rise of a new one. The architecture on Naboo strongly resembles Roman architecture, and in The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, they show one of the most well-known traits of the Roman Empire, their entertainment, with the pod race and the execution scene that bears a close resemblance to chariot races and gladiatorial fights. The execution scene is in a stadium that's very similar to the Colosseum, where most of this Roman entertainment took place. Some other philosophical and mythological influences into the prequel trilogy include Padme's arc, that mirrors Queen Dido of Carthage, who begs her lover to stay the way he is.
Stop! Stop now! Come back! I love you!
Both are queens, and ultimately both of their downfalls come from their passion and love of their significant other becoming evil. Now let's talk about how the prequel trilogy actually made the original trilogy better. Both trilogies follow the basic structure that is the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell, a professor that Lucas studied very heavily, said that myth is the metaphor for experience of life, and the most common form of myth is the hero's journey. The hero's journey entails a story that represents a transition or moving from one identity to another after they are called to an adventure adventure that they do not expect. This is an adventure that has a struggle of good versus evil. With the addition of the prequel trilogy, there becomes two heroes' journeys that ultimately form together and have many parallels. They're both caught into a journey of good and evil by a wise old man who dies right as they start their journey, and both face temptations to the dark side, temptation being another classic form of mythology. The first hero's journey is Anakin, and his turns out to be a very tragic one when he succumbs to the dark side. Then Luke's journey begins, and with the addition of the prequels, part of his journey is to save the first hero from themselves, and for Luke to redeem his father.
I thought to betray you, Father. I feel the good in you.
Luke's journey turns into helping Anakin finish his own hero's journey, and ultimately he does.
You were right about me.
And not only that, but Anakin actually fulfills the prophecy that was foretold so many years before, that he would bring balance to the Force and destroy the Sith. And he does this by killing Palpatine and himself in the process, thus completing the prophecy and his journey, the journey that makes him a tragic hero. The prequel trilogy adds so much dimension to both the ending of Return of the Jedi and Luke's story, and ultimately makes the series have a family aspect to it that revolves around the Skywalker family, something very similar to the Game of Thrones books by George R.R. Martin, written in the 90s, that centers around the Stark family. And going on the family aspect, it takes on classic religious archetypes that the sins of the father will be passed down to their sons and daughters, and Luke almost goes down the same path as his father. Also, Anakin literally passes his scars onto his son when he cuts off his hand, just as Count Dooku cut Anakin's arm off. On top of that, we have a similar situation in the Skywalker family with Padme and her daughter Leia, but rather than sins being passed down, it's Padme's vision of peace and democracy that is ultimately realized through her daughter Leia. Lucas did something amazing while writing the prequels that not many people think about. It perfectly blends mythology, philosophy, religion, politics, and modern history, and retells them all in a way that connects beautifully with the original trilogy, making the entire saga a more meaningful and dynamic story. It's ingenious. George Lucas truly is a visionary, and not many people see that through the prequel trilogy, but it's clear when breaking these films down and looking at the influences that Lucas took to tell this arc of the story that he really did something special while writing these films.